I'd like to call this. Where am I? Community. So provincial clean energy for the 10th to order. We have.
Give me a second. Burlingame, Hillsborough,
Leslie right there.
East Palo Alto, Belmont. We have a quorum.
We don't have anyone. Right? Is there any public comments on any items that are not? The next item is consent calendar, setting the agenda. Actually, we have a motion to approve the agenda.
Again.
Okay, which moved and seconded. All in favor?
Okay.
We have one item on the consent calendar. That's minutes from November 12th, 2024. Any comments? Anybody online?
No, we have no members in the public.
Let's call for a motion, please. I'm gonna call for the vote.
We can do a roll call vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Can we on the regular agenda? Audit and Finance Committee Chair, that would be me. I have no work today. With that, let's move on to Nick. I'm sure you have much to provide us.
I do.
Nick, thank you.
I do. Morning, everyone. Sorry.
Morning.
Okay, we have two items today. Monique and Justin are here. I think you can introduce yourself, or some of you know them. They're gonna give an overview of the markets, the economy, and our investment performance. And I'm also gonna review the second quarter financial results. But before that, I have a couple items just wanted to update you on. First one is we have officially launched an RFP for accounting support. This is the service that Maher currently does for us. We launched a couple weeks ago. Responses are due February 24th. I was a little skeptical if we would even get any other responses other than Maher, but I've actually received 4 sets of questions from different firms. So that I assume means they may not decide to submit a response, but 2 firms that I had reached out to proactively, James, Marta, and Baker Tilly, have submitted questions, and then 2 firms who I've never heard of submitted questions. We obviously posted it on our LinkedIn website, and then Haley and I reposted it on our personal website. I mean, our personal LinkedIn profile, so just trying to get the word out. So hopefully we'll get those 4 plus Maher, and we'll see what comes of it. So that's the first item. And if anyone knows any firms that are interested, accounting support, we'll take any and all requests.
May I please, Chair?
Yes, please.
I just want to say thank you. I think Maher's done a fantastic job. I'm not sure there's, this is an indication that they haven't. They've done a really good job. That I think in full transparency, it's just always a good idea to review the fees, see what the costs are versus other people, and just make sure that we're giving the best value and for service that we can for our constituents, our ratepayers.
Totally agree. Okay. The second one is actually something I wanted to get your guys' opinion on, if it's okay. This is a potential RFP for our banking support. As you all know, we transitioned from First Republic to JP Morgan last year because of the acquisition. It was a painful transition, but we finally got over the hump, and I feel like we're now kind of getting up and running, using their website. No issues, support has been good. We were planning to launch an RFP for to look at what else is out there on the banking side, probably after we get through the accounting. But wanted to get your guys' thoughts on timing for that. To be candid, like I said, it was a little bit of a painful transitioning, and I feel like to now go through a potential another transition so quick, probably wouldn't be my preference. Was thinking of maybe delaying an RFP a little bit till maybe the end of this year, maybe
Mhm.
even next year. But I also want to be sensitive to, there was some comments on the CAC about some consternation about JP Morgan and their support of the fossil fuel industry, which I think most banks do, except for the small ones. So kind of want to get your guys' thoughts on that.
I'm just already.
Okay.
Banks, quick comment before. I think that. Given everything I know, probably they're all in fossil fuels, but I personally think that. For what we do. For what we stand for our customers, we should look to see what else is out there, maybe there's some, like a great local. Outfit that is not in the fossil fuels, given the comments that we got, given. That we have so little control over anything right now, I think that it's worth it to explore. And I would feel good about the organization, that even though it is.
Contrary opinion here, which is we're gonna already be doing an RFP for an accounting and finance audit system. I'd like to get that done first and make sure if we're transitioning, we're doing something. I don't think it's a good idea to be transitioning banking and our audit and our finance all at once. So personally, I would rather take care of the first situation, the RFP for the accounting support. Because if we'll either stay with Maher or if we go with somebody else, I would like to get their input into the banking situation, just like who they have good experience working with or not working with. So to me, I don't mind doing an RFP. I just would like to put it off and to make it more sequential so that we don't disrupt all of the finances in the middle of a very disruptive financial market system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, for me, it's a matter of, think we should, it's not a matter of, I think we should do it.
Okay.
I trust you guys on the time.
It's cool.
Nick, would you, so if you had your druthers, if you given the input you received here. We want blessing, but given the input that you received here, when would you preferably go to find out the bank?
Well, I definitely agree with Donna that I would want to get through the RFP for the Maher first. If there is a change on the accounting, like I said, we'll see if there is, not like it's broken right now, we like the support, but if there is a change, that would take a while to probably implement. And I wouldn't want to be changing also banking providers. So if there isn't a change, maybe by June, by April, May, June, we could be ready to launch an RFP for banking. On the RFP for bank, I'm a little conflicted. I understand the benefits of seeing what's out there. We didn't choose JP Morgan. They sort of chose us because of the acquisition. But selfishly, it was just a lot of work transitioning. And I feel like I'm finally getting used to the website and it just seems a shame to switch so quickly, but I also understand the benefit of an RFP. So I put it on there because honestly, I'm kind of conflicted. I want to get your guys' opinion, which I think I hear loud and clear.
Yep.
I guess. The issue that the CAC brings up, I mean. I guess I would want to understand how you quantify that and research that in a banking relationship, because. And I guess. I just think there are probably other less impactful ways to manage the situation than. I guess I just worry a little bit when it's a little bit of the constant, you go with a small bank and then if they get bought out again, or if, then you have the responsibility to continue to monitor. And if they make an investment, then you have to change it. I mean, there's no way, if you set that as your policy, to me, the primary thing is a good bank, stable bank, strong financials. And the ancillary work that they're doing with other organizations. You know, I just have a really hard time for us as a tiny little piece of their business, sort of telling them, and because most banks are dealing in fossil fuels, or they're dealing in, you know, kind of other elements that we may not agree with, right? And the problem is, right now, yes, we are having the federal agencies, the federal government is kind of dismantling all this, but they're dismantling like everything, like consumer protections. So I worry about going with a small little bank, that they won't have the same processes and financial acumen to, or, you know, maybe, I mean, we can look for sure, but I think there are,
Trade-offs.
we have to think about how to search that in a way that actually is meaningful. If we're gonna do it.
So if I may, and I can invoke PFM, just from previous experience, and you and I have talked about this. So PFM in the past, not your department certainly, but PFM has been very instrumental in the CCA space with structuring banking RFPs, which have evolved over time, right? Because now we're an established concern. So I think there's enough out there that we can then tailor. And even if we ran the RFP in, let's say, June, I fully agree that it's sequential. And I know there's a hassle factor involved, and that's okay.
Yeah.
We see what's out there. I think there's enough in the mix that it's worth looking at. And then we see what's out there and then decide when we might like to do that. Because it could be that we choose to wait till, the end of this calendar year. So it doesn't all have to be right away. But I think what you're hearing is
Yeah, I
it's
hear
worth
it.
it just to see what's
I
out
think
there.
we will have to have a healthy debate about the pros and cons of big bank, small bank,
Exactly.
all that, and because there's pros and cons. I've seen the benefits of a JP Morgan that they can bring to a relationship, the expertise, the capital, we're looking at letters of credit, their website, their mobile, these are top quality. You're not gonna probably get the same as a small bank, but you probably get maybe better quality service, you get more attention. Maybe there's the lack of financing with fossil fuel industry or other industries.
So I think this is helpful here too, and I'm gonna put you in touch with someone I know who's like a global international banking specialist who works on some of this, who can maybe. It's very happy, she testifies all the time. She's like an expert witness on banking, security, banking relationships, and she might just be a person to chat with, like, what do you think would be important in RFP, small bank versus big bank?
Okay, great.
She'll just for free.
Can I just add to what Sean did? So given the changes in the CPF, treasury, controllable currency, all that's I would suggest that, Nick, why don't we give Nick the trigger is by the end of the year, let's look at this. I mean, there are gonna be a lot of changes. That we know, we've already seen some of those changes. CPF may not be here, that would be illegal, but nevertheless.
Yeah, no, it would be.
So, there's a lot of dust that has to settle. So, and end of the year, that gives you some time to ask.
Sure, okay.
And if you get to it by June, because you think, okay, the dust is settled, which I get, then you get to it by June.
Some discretion.
Thank you, appreciate that. Okay.
And then I would keep a running list of things that are important, right? Because it's not just, investment in fossil fuels, but the relationships, the credit, how that helps for our credit, the customer service, the
Pricing.
whatever it is, everything that you're like frustrated with Chase, write that on your. For an individual with, regular amount of money, it's definitely.
It's fine. Never mind.
But, individual.
Yeah,
It's just. So anyway, just a running list, right? What would you like to see ideally?
So I like Leslie's approach. I like an approach that is more holistic and not just we're doing it with JP Morgan because they invest in fossil fuels. That is too narrow.
Agreed.
It is too problematic and it is too, it's just nebulous and it's not quantifiable for our staff. Or it also sets us up that anytime in the future,
Fire
you get, or you pick up a banking relationship, a small little bank picks up a big, is working now for Chevron, like, or whatever. All of a sudden, then we have set a precedent that our business is going to be not the primary focus in what we need, but we're dealing with community and public input, because I will tell you, the minute you open the door and say, what is your standard, and it's very non-quantifiable and touchy-feely, and I don't like this, or I don't like that, or they did something bad in my neighborhood, and I don't like it, they didn't lend me a loan, I don't know, it just starts to get so, I just think staying quantifiable and staying more around the business with a smaller shadow piece being, what are their sort of ethos and philosophies?
That's in the
It's in the
RFP.
RFP qual.
Yes, it's in the
It's
RFP.
gonna come back to it. So
And JP Morgan may wish to respond, but we didn't choose that. And I think that's part of also what's going, is that we need to get out there and look at fees and all of it. Understood. Yep.
About be the driving factor.
Yeah, I think
what's
that's,
next thing?
Okay.
Just quick, going through the list here, most of these are just FYI. Rate change that the board approved in December, is going into effect today, February 10th. We were hoping February 1, but it just takes a while for Calpine to process that, so that's exciting. The ROC, the Risk Operating Committee, is officially operationalized. We held our first ROC meeting in January. We actually had 2 meetings since
Yeah.
then. The first one, we
Very
approved
good.
the ROC procedures, and then we had a meeting where we actually covered some sort of content and gave Roy and his team approval to execute certain types of transactions. Prepay on here, just as an FYI, February, this is the month where we're gonna start realizing savings. It hasn't happened yet because we pay our bills at the end of the month. So we are putting in place the process to appropriately invoice. It's very complicated. This is one of the only negatives that I could come up with for prepay, is it just adds more work, but it's worth it. 500K a month is definitely worth it. So that'll be happening this month. And then the last, yeah.
Last time.
Sure.
Can you, to the extent possible, because you guys are not doing checking in every hour, to the extent possible, could you let us know of how much time you think, not, but after you've done this, several months or half a year or a year, like how much time do you think it's taking to?
Yeah, no, and we will be coming back. I haven't mapped out my thought on work interacting with this committee and the board, but as we've all talked about, we're gonna potentially do a second one and talk to the banks. And one of the considerations, now that we actually have one under our belt, is the bankers will all say, oh, it's easy and no time. So now we'll have the truth of that. So that would be definitely a consideration. So fair point, definitely.
well, we gotta let the dust settle on some of this Trump stuff too.
Yeah.
To see what happens with municipal bonds and
Yeah. You
there's a
probably
few
heard
things.
that municipal bonds are on the table potentially.
Taking away the tax benefit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's-
we don't think it's gonna happen.
Very interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, who knows?
It's very interesting.
So we're tracking that.
I have missed that
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I
I
think
can't
I've
remember who
reached out.
introduced it, but it's on the
Um,
table.
yeah, we've reached out to our bankers. I'm sure PFM has a perspective. It's a non-zero probability, but apparently it happens every
Pretty
few
low.
years that it comes on the table as a potential saver to pay for new programs. And the last thing.
Tax breaks.
Yeah.
We just. Yeah, it's just insane.
I know.
Thank you, Carla.
It's like,
Yes,
that is the
it's
word.
just insane.
Just can't say.
We do have PFM here, so I'm gonna hand it over to them in a second to talk about going to the markets, economy, and then the money that they manage for us. But I did, now that we're a year into, so we sort of, as you may remember, when I just joined, we sort of reallocated our cash we put about $160 million into CAMP, which is a short-term fund that I think you are all familiar with. And then we allocated a little north of $100 million each of Chandler and PFM, who are here. I waited for this meeting because I wanted to get a full calendar year under our belt. We actually seated Chandler, I think, on January 1, so it's actually a perfect time period. But I thought it'd be helpful to see how the money's done. We've been in this unique environment. Again, I don't want to steal the PFM team's thunder, but where short-term rates have been higher than long-term rates, which is slowly changing, and probably will change this year. So as a result, CAMP has been a moneymaker for us, so to speak. You can see the duration on there, the maturity of 42 days, a lot shorter than both the money that Chandler and PFM managed for us. And so that's just been a little bit of the luck of the draw. I wouldn't expect that to continue, but 5.4%. And then Chandler and PFM both have beaten the benchmark. The benchmark is an ICE, Govy, and corporate index, 1 to 5 years, I think it is. So that's great. We don't want too much of a beat or too much of a loss, but we want to sort of track the index. You can see the numbers there and relative metrics, but I think it's been a good year, and this has been a nice tailwind for us in our financials. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Justin and Monique, who you guys have met before, to talk about the markets in a little more detail. I think we used to do these meetings before I joined. Like I said, I was waiting for a full year to have under our belt. So they're here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks for having me.
For you, Sean, give them.
So.
This is the, if you want to. Thank you.
Justin Mastrello joined our team towards, I think you've been with us a full year now, at the end of 2023. And, we've been, in the habit of expanding our team, making sure that our clients are covered. Justin's going to lead the majority of the presentation this morning.
Great. Well, thank you all for having us. I'm really excited to be here. I'm in San Francisco, so I'm local to you all if you ever need to come in and talk, more, or if I can be more advisory to the agency and help. So what we'll go through today is just an overview of the markets and then discuss the performance of the portfolio through the calendar year ending December 31st, 2024. This first slide, titled Current Market Themes, just goes through our sort of high-level thoughts for the economy and the way the market's kind of shaped out through the end of the calendar year. We are certainly of the opinion that we feel the economy is headed toward a soft landing scenario. And while that hasn't yet been achieved, and we won't know specifically when we're in it until we're actually in it with a lot of the data that'll come about, we still feel that we're headed in that direction, despite all the sort of noise that's coming out more recently from DC. Risk of recession generally remains quite low, but there is a sort of higher for longer sentiment that's developing as we see treasury yields and rates where they are today. They certainly rose during the fourth quarter, which drove market values lower in the portfolio. But that said, this remains to be a still attractive time to be purchasing fixed income assets for the agency. With respect to uncertainty, as you know, with Trump 1.0, same thing we're seeing with Trump 2.0, right? There's a lot of news coming out of DC, whether it's tariffs on China, China, Mexico, and Canada. This morning, we're hearing about tariffs among aluminum and steel imports of around 25%. But that said, the market, the Fed, still remain highly focused on data, specifically related to inflation and employment, since that's their sort of dual mandate. Like I said earlier, market reactions to all of this during the quarter, generally we saw yields rose, right? And again, that sort of drove market values lower, but we continue to see attractive opportunities to purchase spread product for the agency, and that helps generate incremental income for your portfolio.
Just to add some brief color to that, I think the sentiment from the Fed in terms of their rate position really is the hedge against risk. The uncertainty coming out of Washington and, quite frankly, the chaos that it's been putting in the market. I feel like the Fed is taking a preemptive approach by saying, let's just keep rates where they are, which is a little bit higher than anticipated. And that's going to be a hedge against some of the inflationary environment that may come with tariffs or the expectation of tariffs on some goods and services.
Thank you. Yeah, so, diving a bit deeper into the yield curve and what we saw during the calendar year, you'll see on the right side, a dashed yellow line showing yields at the end of 2023, and then a solid blue line showing yields at the end of 2024. The main observation here is yields did come lower, right? But we're seeing normalization in the yield curve as it's beginning to steepen, particularly from the 1 year to 5 year period that we're seeing here. That said, as Nick mentioned earlier, the cap balances for the agency, the overnight monies for the agency have done quite well. Look at how high, overnight yields have been. They've certainly come down from, over 5% at the end of 2023, but they're still at an attractive, over 4% as of the end of this calendar year. As of this morning, we continue to see that persisting. The 3-month is at 4.34, and that's up about 3 basis points from where we ended the year. But we're still seeing steepening, and we anticipate that overnight yields, that sort of 3-month yield, even the cap yields, will eventually come down, as Nick alluded to. Diving a bit further as we look to the invested portfolio, Nick mentioned the agency's benchmark is the 1 to 3 year W corporate index, or 1 to 5 year W corporate index. And here we're showing a mix of sort of 2 different yields. So we're seeing yields for the 2-year treasury on the left and the 10-year treasury on the right. Both certainly saw volatility throughout the year as additional data were released with respect to inflation, right? Even rewind to 2022 when a lot of us might have been at long gas lines at Costco, for example, waiting in line to fill up our tanks if we didn't have EVs, right? But at the same time, we saw unemployment cross into 4% toward the summer, right? So we had record low unemployment, under 4% for 28 months, and that certainly changed, and that has driven now these yields a bit lower, and you see the volatility there. But year to year, the 2-year ended at around the same level. You can kind of see December, halfway through the chart. December to December 23, 24, we ended the 2-year at about the same level. The 10-year is up about nearly 50 basis points higher than where we ended 2023. Of course, I think.
So if for clients that have the full range of fixed income, the full universe, where are you putting them? Because we're like a 1 to 5, so we're short duration, very low risk. And I'm just sort of curious, if you've got a 10-year treasury at 4.57 and a 2-year treasury at 4.24, are people locking in the 4.57 for 10-year, or are they? I'm just curious who's buying what, where, when. Is it just diversification on big institutional portfolios?
No, this is a great question.
No, yeah, I mean, I think, quite frankly, what we'll hear from the desk, and I think our perspective is that rates in general are at, near historic highs, period. And so if you have liquidity, although you're getting paid healthily for that liquidity, then now is a good time to lock up interest earnings. Just to get some stability in the portfolio. Now you have to hedge that with your cash flow needs, but we're seeing that if there's an opportunity for you to go a bit longer and lock in higher yields, then it's a good time.
But even though we're constrained on the 1 to 5, we're still kind of a microcosm of that. It's like, so the fact that we have funds that are different strategies, like being very short duration, you guys being able to move throughout, technically that's diversifying our
Yes.
small world that we're in.
Yep.
And it helps to stabilize and dampen some of the volatility on the overall.
Yes, and I remember we went through that discussion when we were considering CAMP as a liquidity vehicle, and even that portfolio is an enhanced cash portfolio.
Yeah.
Right, so there's some play and maturity distribution in that portfolio itself. But for your longer duration portfolios, you are taking advantage of longer duration securities within the framework that the California Government Code gives us, right? We're constrained in a way. And so our general thought is, if there is liquidity that's not necessary, put it out a little bit, lock in these yields. Because it's so uncertain what's going on, and it's just a way to hedge and to lock in higher yielding options. Like, I think our portfolio on next slide was yielding at 386. We're grateful that rates are staying elevated. We're a little bit shorter, so that's going to allow us to take advantage of even higher yielding securities. And our portfolio management team is trying to lock in as much as possible right now before things go nuts.
Yeah, no, and to Monique's point, you can see that here with the interest earnings for the quarter, right? That's really offsetting a lot of the market value decline that we saw as rates rose, right? So we saw about 879,000 generated in interest income this quarter. And I guess the interesting observation here is relative to other periods you see on this chart. Now that we've been able to lock in those higher yields, those higher coupons that are getting thrown off of the current holdings, we're outpacing the sort of the annual interest rates. And so you're seeing, for the year, 3.3 million was earned in interest. That outpaces the 3-year average of about 1.8 million. As a 3-year number there. And similarly, on the quarterly basis, the 879 that was generated is now outpacing the 1 year on a quarterly basis. That was about 846,000. And 3 years, it was 469,000. So, it's meaningful now, right? We're not having conversations about investing in 25 basis point CP over 10 basis point treasuries, right? This is real money that's meaningful. So
It's painful to get there.
yeah, absolutely. Turning now to the portfolio snapshot, this is just a very high level overview.
Wait,
Sorry,
can I just ask a question here? And this is more to you, Nick. So if you all wind up rebalancing the portfolio to be on the longer side to lock in, my assumption is that, Nick, you're gonna have to figure out if we're gonna need any, cash flows in the future. We obviously have the reserves and stuff, but this discussion ultimately winds up back with you, right? So that if they say, look, we really wanna, weight this at 30%, 3 to 5, right? Is this, do they consult you at all? Do they consult you at all?
We're still targeting the benchmark, so not as much there. Where I think there is a decision that we have is, do we want to move some of the camp money into the line? It's hard to say longer. the PFM or Chandler. To be honest, when we put money in camp, and the conversation started before I even joined, it was not meant to be I don't think a diversification of return. It was must be a liquidity vehicle
Yeah.
of we're going to need this money in the next year.
Well, and protection, to the extent you can protect capital, you protect capital.
Yeah, and so let's put aside and we'll draw on it throughout the next few years. We haven't, things have been a little better than we thought, which is not a bad thing. And so we've not needed to draw on it. And that's also been to our benefit at keeping it there because it's outperformed Chandler and PFM, not their fault, but just the way the yield curve is. So it's kind of been a lucky situation. As we put together the budget going forward, we'll have to see, do we need $160 million in a short-term vehicle? Do we want to take 60 of it and sort of allocate it longer term, which may be good timing as well. So that's where we'd have to have the conversation. But we don't get involved in managing, giving them, hey, I think you should move out on the curve or buy some IBM debt or that's not my area of expertise. And that's sort of why we hired them.
Yeah, we're certainly willing to, revisit your cash needs as you all want to develop your processes.
Yeah, my guess is we will be moving with, again, it's been to our advantage to sort of slowly make that decision, but we will be moving some of the camp money into.
Yeah, we've seen certain jurisdictions kind of, kind of on a sort of periodic basis, move over, call it $5 million every quarter or so. But certainly, those agencies that decided to keep their money over there, they've still continued to do well, so.
Yeah, it's not like we can monetize. You're right.
Not like we're
Alternative.
lots of money in real estate, private equity.
There are no alts. Global portfolio.
Opportunistic.
That's good.
Yeah, you're right.
We know.
There's a-
All relative.
I think we should be.
So just digging into just some high level portfolio statistics here, you can see that the balances for the PFM portfolio stand at a little over 110 million That's up from 105 million at the end of 2023. Duration's nearly at 100% of the benchmark. Credit quality, that's improved over the year. It's a little over 82% now. And then you'll observe also that duration in the 0 to 1 is slightly elevated relative to the benchmark, as well as the 3 to 4 year benchmarks, because we're able to generate, some incremental yield from those overnight monies, as well as those coupons, those yields that we've been lock up further out in the yield curve. Sector allocations I'm going to talk about on this next slide. There aren't really quarter to quarter changes that are remarkable. What you'll see here is that the majority of the portfolio continues to be invested in US Treasuries, but there has been an increase to agency commercial mortgage-backed securities of about 1.7%, and corporate notes continue to represent about 15% of the agency's investments at this time. So one key thing that we also wanted to review with you was the sustainable investing goals of the agency's portfolio. In August of 2020, the agency set out to pursue environmental, social, governmental risk mitigation in its investment portfolio. So on the right side in that green box, you'll see some of the criteria that the agency has put forth for us to implement in its investment strategy. So you'll see medium to lower risk ESG risk ratings are required for many of the holdings in the portfolio. There's also limitations with respect to environmental risks and specific exclusions among certain industries, specifically energy services, oil and gas, and refiners and pipelines. So what has all of this actually generated for the portfolio that's meaningful with respect to this risk mitigation? This slide intends to describe a lot of that. You'll see that overall, the ESG risk ratings are now available for 33% of the portfolio this year. That's up about 1% from the prior year. So that pie chart in the kind of center of the slide on the left, you'll see low to medium totals about 33%. On the right side of the chart, those bars, observe that there are diamonds that show the portfolio weighting. The greatest sector for the portfolio at this time is banks. Banks often generate or often issue fixed income bonds into the market that we purchase for the portfolio. So that accounts for the large majority of the investments, but observe that the ESG risk rating for that is generally low. It's just under 20 rated. The highest risk rating is automobiles on this chart. That's on the far left side of the right-hand side chart. But those account for less than 5% of the agency's portfolio. So what does all this mean for how their portfolio is now scored with respect to its ESG risk rating? Compared to last year, the overall ESG risk rating was 21.3, and that's squarely rated medium risk. This year it's improved. It's now 18.4, which is squarely low risk rated. Now, this is great, and I would applaud the agency for its mitigation strategy in managing ESG risk. But as the portfolio is generally short, it's about a 2.5 year maturity on the portfolio. This rating is going to bounce around. So anticipate that. But I think this is an important milestone for the agency as we think about how to manage this ESG risk that you also care deeply about. Yes.
So as the current administration signals strongly that DEI, ESG, irrelevant, and companies have to abandon reporting or even concern about operating in this world. How does that impact your ability to invest?
Such a good question, Donna. So one of the reasons we partner with a firm like Sustainalytics is because they're hyper-focused on acquiring this data from companies. And we recognize that, we in our process, we're solely focused on financials, ability to repay debt.
Yep.
And so Sustainalytics is looking at this because this is a high priority item. You're right, folks are, opting out
Oh,
of
they-
disclosures, of, frameworks where they're trying to sort of, formalize some of these metrics. And so what Sustainalytics is doing is trying to get a sense of, where they can find that data. And quite frankly, the good thing and the bad thing is that there really was no formal set of disclosures around these topics. And so they had to get used to over the past 10, 15
Got it.
years of searching
And
out.
doing their own
And
independent
yes, and
research.
doing their own independent research, right? So if anything, this is just gonna slow down that formal set of disclosures around this work. But we're happy to be partnering with Sustainalytics, who already has a process in place.
Exactly.
Can I ask a follow-on, which is related, which is pursuant to the banking RFP that we're talking about? Do banks have an ESG? I know it's probably not formal, but,
Yeah.
do they have a ranking for,
They do.
and,
They
and
do.
that is well known, and so that potentially can be part of
And
our evaluation criteria.
Sean, that was actually, as y'all were going through this discussion, and we're trying to stay in our lane, but I was actually thinking that, if it's helpful to you all when you do go through that process, if you do want sort of, reports about the banks and, if they have a Sustainalytics report or score, we're happy to be helpful to you.
That's great, because you all have done great work for CCAs in the banking space too. Thank you.
I guess also, to me, this is really important that we may see some pressure to ease up on this, and I just think we have to push back and just say this remains an important mission-driven work for us, and we're gonna continue to do it.
Agreed.
Okay. Yeah, no, this is, it's meaningful for us too, so we're glad to see clients so heavily invested in this as well. So thank you for the conversation about this. So the final slide we have is just things we're thinking about, right? And certainly we talked about the fourth quarter, and I won't kind of belabor a lot of that. There's one line there that talks about the considerations we have surrounding the new presidential administration. That's our concerns about taxes, tariffs, immigration and regulation. In our view, I'll just quickly speak to these specifically. In our view, we feel lower taxes are probably good for growth, but they'll likely be negative, for example, for the US deficit, and that, the funding is gonna have to come from somewhere. If they want to make permanent certain tax cuts. At the same time, tariffs, a lot of that, is in flux. We've seen the 10% Chinese tariffs as well as 25% Canadian Mexican tariffs. And those have been, implemented and pulled back, and some of them still persist. And now we're seeing this talk about aluminum and steel tariffs, though there's no timeline for any of that either. So, a lot of this we feel seems to be some sort of negotiation tactic for the administration, and we'll continue to monitor that closely. But, the real consideration for the portfolio itself is the potential inflationary pressure that we may see on US economy, and that will eventually drive, impacts of the portfolio. Certainly immigration is a concern, as that may change the mix of the labor force and how wages may fall out from there. And regulation, that's also important. Right? We may see sort of deregulation, financial services industries, energy industries, potential M&A activity. Those sorts of things are, front and center. Right.
These can't value each other, they have no idea. So, please.
Yeah, so I mean, this is all a very fluid situation. Monitoring very closely. Specifically, that all lends itself back to the rate discussion we've had. We don't have an awesome crystal ball for any of this. I can't say anyone really does. But with respect to the Fed dot plot, they're anticipating about two rate cuts this year, about 50 basis points. Most of the market is at about one cut potentially this year at this point. The Fed is becoming more hawkish in a lot of its sort of pronouncements that they release. So, again, we'll continue to be hyper focused on a lot of this for the agency as we steward the portfolio. The real priorities for the agency, as everyone is well aware, are really safety and liquidity. So, we have to be mindful that despite preferences for ESG, and all of the noise that's even happening in Washington. So we're very careful about that. And we appreciate all of the discussion today. So with that said, are there any other thoughts or questions from folks that we can help answer?
So many questions.
We don't know.
Like how is it? Appreciate you guys paying attention to all of this for.
Yeah, but sector application and Hillary's seen, yes, I mean, their GSEs, right? They've already signaled that they're going to privatize those. They wanted to do that the first term. They're now very interested in privatizing that. It's time, and they've said that they want to do that. How we have 16% of the portfolio in agency CMBSs. I mean, I don't know what agencies, but I can imagine which ones they are. It looks like they're a atomic clock. Are those at all? But what would be the impact indeed if they went through that process of privatizing them and running those markets?
Unclear. I think right now, I mean, I feel like chaos is a strategy of the administration. And at this point, I think where everybody sits is a guessing game of how likely is this to actually get done. And I feel as though, given some of the priorities that have been front forward for the administration, it's sort of in the unlikely bucket. So the market has not had a lot of reaction to that. I will say with the CMBSs, and Justin, correct me if I'm off base here, but the good thing about those is that, they're cash flow driven, they're collateralized, there's a basket of assets. The agency being that sort of extra level of protection, it sort of creates a more, I don't want to say better asset class because I hesitate to say it better in meetings like this, but we're still very comfortable with the space.
Didn't people say that in 2008?
Yeah, no, yes, that's very different agency type. But
But the infection spread.
but we will say though that we do have a committee that takes apart these obligations in the same way we treat credit. And so we don't have a de facto, you're a federal agency, you're in the good bucket. Our credit team unpacks the agencies the same way they do any corporation that we're invested in, and we're still very comfortable with that credit.
I mean, Carlos, I don't know if I'm right about this or not, but really, if they dismantled the agencies, I don't really understand what that would mean. Would that mean no more issuance of the bonds, or would it just mean no more backing of no more credit backing of the government stands as the backer of those agencies?
It's kind of. It's not. Yes,
It's you've got the agencies that actually put the
There's some certainty that gets removed,
Yeah.
even though that's not a lot of certainty.
Right.
The GSC is like, you can't take it to the bank, so.
It's gotta be securitized, or you can't.
Yeah.
Unravel these things out of banks and move them in and refresh the capital stack, right? So you have to have that. I mean, this has been a part of our marketplace very long time. So we're not talking about dismantling the agencies so that that the market goes away.
I have no idea.
I think it's more, I think sort of what's being contemplated is more, they're on their own. There's
Okay.
no, you don't
There's no
get
implied
you don't get a
asset value.
wallet,
Right.
it's out for you. But that's also the reason
Which-
why we do,
right.
credit research in these agencies.
But that would affect yield. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a riskier venture. You know, Uncle Sam who's there, even though it's an implied. But and enough speculation, I guess. It's 60% of the workload.
But we deeper than just,
Yes,
it's a bottom up, okay, the top down.
that's correct. That's correct.
Okay, well, thank you guys for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yes.
We're happy to.
Okay,
Thank you very much, and sorry I was late.
No, thank you, Director Romero.
Thank you.
so, finish up, I'm gonna walk through second quarter fiscal results, so you guys are welcome to stay if you're interested, but I'll talk to you later.
Thanks so much. I'll feel better.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for reminding.
So fiscal 2Q, this is the quarter ending December 31. I'll go through an overview of how things went. You probably can guess they went very well. These are hopefully getting familiar with the format here on the pages, but to start with load, we continue to be under load from a budget perspective relative to budget. Load is up year over year by about 3%, but we had higher aspirations for load growth in our budget setting process, which we're always trying to improve the forecasting process. A lot of it is driven by weather. So in the first quarter, August and September, we had mild weather, which drove down load. For the last 3 quarters, we were only 1.4% below budget. So that's a pretty good, while you'd always like to be right on, I'd say that's pretty good budgeting. Year to date, if you take all 6 months, we're 2.4 below. And you can see in the line, the budget is the orange, the actual is the blue. We were below in 4 of the 6 months. So not an issue, but we're always trying to improve. So load was lower than budgeted, which impacted revenues a little bit. Again, to get everyone focused on the page, the top table is the 2Q, so the last 3 months. The bottom table is year to date, so 6 months. And we've got first column is actual, then we've got the budget, and then we've got a year ago actual in the variance. So a lot of numbers, let's see, a lot of numbers on the page. I tried to circle, sort of the key is revenue was 2.3 below budget for the 2Q and 3.4 below budget for year to date. That was almost entirely due to the load, which I just referenced. Again, percentage wise, 2% variance or so, pretty good comparison. You will notice, revenue is up year over year by, $11.4 million if you take the bottom table. A lot of that was due to the bill credit, which we gave a year ago. So that artificially drove down revenue in the last year period, which makes the comparison look a little better than it actually was. As I mentioned, load was only about 3%.
John, can I, if I may?
Sure.
I want to understand the load piece. So when we budget and plan, we assume a certain load, right? And then we go out into the market and say, we want to secure this for this year in one way or another, whether we have, the PPAs or whether we have to go to the market, and then we hedge against that. Is that, so the losses that we see here, or I don't know if I want to call them losses, but the bracketed negative numbers are there because we missed the budget, or are they actual in the sense that, yes, we went out, we procured this energy?
This is to budget.
This is to budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
Budget, which was set a year or 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So
And the variance is still relatively modest. I mean, we're always trying,
Yeah.
right, to make sure. And one of the things that we're working with Roy and team on is, the forecast and really adding some additional modeling into the forecast so that this coming year, hopefully, but there's always going to be that variance relative to weather,
Yeah.
relative to market prices, and,
Mhm.
some of that we can't
yeah,
entirely
weather's
mitigate.
we assume a normalized weather year. There's a lot of
Yeah.
math that goes behind this. We had a teach-in with Jackson gave us.
Yes, that was great.
Weather is always gonna change one way or the other, and we use a normalized year. The other thing that we're dealing with now is just the behind the meter load right now that is changing. It's different now. It's hard to look at historic, a lot of when you're creating a budget, you use a lot of historical data, but now we've got more solar on rooftops, we've got more EV charging, we've got more battery, and so we're still figuring out how that impacts load. I think we had greater expectation for EV load and electrification than actually materialized, so we're figuring that out. Same thing with solar.
Thank you.
Sure. So, but I think load and revenues, which I'll get into on costs, we are pretty right on. So that's, I mean, it's all, none of it's a bad story, but I think that's a success. On the costs, we are well off. We're a good off because we're below costs. So I'll start with the big elephant in the room, and that is cost of energy. As you all know, that's about 90% of our cost profile. So everything after this pales in comparison. You can see the top table over the last 3 months, we were $36 million under budget. Most of that was due, and I circled a number there, to RECs.
Yeah.
We executed a strategy, which the board, and you're all probably very familiar with, of selling excess RECs. When we decided we wanted to end the year at about 60% renewables, we were able to monetize those RECs that we had. That wasn't in the budgeting. We probably could have anticipated it, but we didn't budget for it. And so we sold $26 million of RECs in December alone for the calendar year. And so that is driving almost all of the variance in the last 3 months. There are others ups and downs, capacity, RA prices were a little higher than we thought. Energy was better because some of it was load, but we also did a better job optimizing our congestion revenue rights. And there's other gives and takes, but the predominant variance driver is the REC sales we did in the December period. The bottom table is year to date, about $46 million. So obviously that means 10 million was in the first quarter, 36 million was in the second quarter. Again, the reason the second quarter was so off was because of the REC sales. It all happened in 1 month, actually. Any questions on this? Obviously a good story, and this is driving our cash position and our change in that position, which we'll get to, but
So I just want to
Yeah.
ask for the benefit of the group. So going forward, as we incrementally increase toward 100% renewable in 2030 as the current goal, we are long in certain months and certain years, right? Which predicated or preempted the REC sale at the end of last year. We should be able to kind of have a better sense for that going forward, right?
definitely.
Not this was unique this year, so maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
It was unique in that we didn't budget for it.
That's right.
The board approved it, I think, in June, and by then the budget was already set. It's not unique in the sense that for the next few years, we will be doing these REC sales, so we'll continue to see that nice cash flow in, but it won't
We
be a
will have budgeted.
yeah, we will budget
That's
for it, so
right.
it won't be a variance to budget, if that
That's
makes
right.
sense.
It's a strategy that we are employing to maximize affordability while still incrementally moving toward our goal. But the board changed that strategy last year, so it was a little misalignment with the
Yeah.
budget, but just FYI.
Exactly. Any questions on this? Like I said, this is sort of the big driver. The next pages, the numbers are gonna look a lot smaller. So change in that position, this is, yeah.
One thing I wanna say.
Sure.
So we have a lot of new members, Carlos, on our big committee and,
Our board,
Yeah, on the board.
on our big committee.
Big committee, the big
The big,
board.
the next one is coming up,
The
executive.
capital BC.
Big board. Yeah, I was talking to Sean and it was Nick and Sean were working with the new board members who are sort of, focusing on these large numbers and earnings and things. And I've been trying to figure out a way to think about that and how to explain it. And really, one of the analogies I kind of came up with was this notion of a pension fund where there are large dollar amounts that are sitting in reserve to pay future liabilities. And you don't wanna raid those, you don't wanna take those pension dollars and, buy an office building, for example, for your pension system, or you don't wanna take those dollars and,
Prematurely give.
Redistribute them back out.
redistribute it, yeah. So I kind of was thinking, to try to figure out some sort of an analogy that these guys can kind of use to help new people about why we can't we're not a social services agency. We're an energy company and we just can't read our, sort of reason we need these is a lot like actuarial. You're looking out over the long term and understanding the volatility and needing to make sure you have enough to continue to keep the organization running. So I don't have an answer for it or anything. I think we should just.
It's an awareness.
I'm just trying to help them figure out how to
one
sort of
thing-
message that to the new people.
One thing we had talked about after meeting with Jackie was, we just met on Thursday, so I haven't done it, just putting together some graphs showing the volatility in the energy markets. I mean, RA, you can see year over year, huge increase, and just, we need some amount of cushion to prepare for that volatility so that we're not having to increase rates on the spot for customers, something like that. I haven't seen what the graphs look
And
like.
at the same time, we also talked about, not with Jackie, but after really making sure that year over year, that we're closer to that upper end target, 250, 275, 3 at the max. And because we go through periods where we're in very good spot, we're well above 300, which I think we are now. And so we also, I think, have an obligation to stay closer to that 300 as opposed to inching up to 4. And just having the discipline around, anticipating rates and doing what we can. So I think there's a both and.
Yeah, I think
And,
what we did last meeting of lowering the cost of
Right.
electricity for people.
but we didn't take the whole thing, right? So it was a risk strategy to say, we're gonna bank some of it and we're gonna take a good piece of it and reduce rates. So we'll keep with that.
Yeah, I think even the non-math person here, I think it's helpful for the new people to show that the historical years that were, scary.
Yeah,
right?
COVID.
Like, yes, don't just look at this, don't just look at these
Right.
numbers and explain it just like you did. With the rec sales and December, all of that, that's why the numbers are like this. But also just look back a few years. And the other thing is, there's so much that's not within our control, so we have to hedge against that.
Yep.
We don't control the weather.
Yep.
Actually, Nick, that would be a great idea for our next study session in March. Because Roy's gonna do the Energy 101.
Yep.
And I think we could layer on some of that. So
Mhm.
let's talk.
The volatility in the market.
Yeah, let's just talk after.
Okay, so change in net position, this is just the last 3 months, so 2Q. So again, this is sort of the full income statement. We've already talked about revenues being off 2.2 million versus budget, cost of energy being favorable to budget by almost $36 million. The rest of the numbers were pretty right on budget, give or take, they're all black, meaning they're all positive, that's good. We continue to underspend budget. The biggest variance, which is not huge, is in programs, which has been a continuous trend of some of our programs being delayed a little bit or slower uptake than we expected. The one negative on there is the 1 point non-operating income, and the reason we just heard, interest rates went up this quarter. And so we had some unrealized losses in the most recent 3 months. But net for the last 3 months, we are almost $35 million favorable to budget in change in net position. You can't multiply that by 2 because the rec sales, as I mentioned, happen in December.
Yeah.
That's what's driving that. For the year to date, so this is again the 6-month data. Again, we already talked about revenues and cost of energy variance up top. Again, all the cost categories are favorable to budget, so that's a good thing. We're underspending. There is a pretty big favorability on programs, which is a trend we saw in the first quarter, and we will continue to see that in the second half of the year. Raphael's already updated his forecast, which is not reflected here in the budget. but he is expecting for the full year to be about $10 million below budget.
What do you think?
Yeah, so that's due to some of our programs were delayed. The turnkey program for electrification didn't get up and running until October. We had maybe aggressively assumed earlier in the fiscal year, and we've seen a little bit of a slower uptake there. EV ready program has been a little slower than we would have expected, and so that's gonna be a continued trend for the year.
We're gonna be working with him the next budget season. This is a little
Yeah,
bit of a
closer.
trend with programs in general over the last couple of years, so likely to see a trimmed program budget
Yeah.
next fiscal year.
And that's really important to, I think, point out that it's like your if you're a city person, it's like your capital improvement budget. Like, I'd love to invest $200 million in CIP, but I don't have the staff to get it out there, even if I had the money.
Right.
A lot of it's just.
It's just like you have to get real about what the
Cash
market will
flow.
absorb,
Yeah,
what we can do.
whatever.
It's a little too aspirational.
Yeah, it's a little.
It's like balance aspiration with reality. Yes, exactly. But as we're moving, and trying to get way more disciplined about revenue requirement and cost of service, then we also have
Yeah.
to just have a realistic. Listen, and if there is a good opportunity where we're pushing to be over budget, then we make that amendment. Right? We make that adjustment.
The other red circle here is non-operating income, which is code word. It's not code word, but that's basically just interest income. $6 million favorability. A lot of that is due to we didn't expect interest rates to stay as high as they did, so when we forecasted, we assumed a lower return, and then we also had some unrealized gains in the first quarter, not the last quarter, but the first quarter when interest rates went down, kind of herds up and down. So that's been a nice favorability. So that's the net on change in net position. The last page is cash. It's a good thing, maybe too much of a good thing. We are now about $400 million of cash on hand. That's pretty much in line for the last 2 quarters. So it's not like we're generating a lot of cash. We just expected to draw it down. We expected it to go down, and it's basically stayed flat, up a few million here or there. Days cash on hand is 367, again, probably above our target of maybe
is above.
250 to 300.
Wow.
It is above.
It is above. But
And we
do-
have to deal with it.
But we do expect, we just lowered rates the next 6 months, so that
Yeah.
will lower $13 million from at least what we were budgeted for. We'll have the exercise of going to set rates in June for the next year, and so this will all go into the equation. We do expect PG&E rates to go down and the PCIA to go up on
Yeah.
January 1 next year, and so we want to
Hedge for that.
cushion for that, so we
Yep.
can continue to offer
We're
a
gonna be
discount.
moving.
So you can see these numbers, we try to target about $15 million at JP Morgan. Since we only earn about 3% there, and the rest is allocated, which we already talked about, CAMP, PFM, and Chandler. And we may look to reallocate some of the CAMP money into Chandler and PFM as we redo our forecast. And that is it. There's appendix, which has a little more detail on our full income statement, a lot of numbers, so I won't bore you. And then just, monthly data on revenue and cost of energy.
Thank you.
That's it.
They're public.
That's it.
Is there public comment?
Yeah.
Oh, no public.
Please do.
So it sounds like we've got. I guess this, I don't know how we wanna catch this, future agenda item or something, and I don't think our attorney's in here, so we're probably.
Jen is
Oh, Jen's right there,
No.
yeah.
earmuffs.
I just wanna part of the financials that are going on here is the lease for this building and that we've hired a consultant to help us.
Broker.
A broker, yeah, so can you just maybe update everyone?
Sure, would love to. So we,
Well, Jones LaSalle is a consultant. I mean,
Right,
they're like a full
Yeah,
service.
you're right, I guess I was correcting, because we're not, I think of consultant as you're paying.
Yeah.
And we are actually not paying jail anything.
Correct.
They will make money from the transaction
If
and not even from us.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Landlord pays, like when you buy a house, the seller pays. So that's why I corrected on a consultant. Yeah, so I think we shared in January with the board, but we hired JLL. We did a RFP, a mini RFP. Met with the four, I think, leading brokers in the world: CBRE, Cushman Wakefield, JLL, and Newmark. The team, there were about 5 of us who went through a rigorous process. They came in and gave their dog and pony show, their presentation, and we just felt really comfortable with JLL. They all could have done it. These are all the 4 leading firms, but we just felt the relationship, the person, some of it, who you feel comfortable with, how we would be treated. Like a couple of the firms, we were just worried if we would be a small fish in a big pond for them. So we engaged JLL. It's a little bit of a weird engagement since we don't really pay them, but we did lock, that we have a contract with them.
To represent you.
Yes, and we just had our first site visits on Friday, which Sean joined us. It's not an exhaustive, it wasn't an exhaustive site visit. It was an opportunity for them to show us what is potentially out there.
Right.
Because we have a real sort of fish on the hook, so to speak, or whatever the metaphor is, with this Samtrans opportunity, which we probably need to decide in the next 6 months. It's hard to make that decision without even knowing
What else is
what
out
do I
there?
compare that to? And so we saw 5 sites on Friday. I didn't think any of them were great, but first step.
It was
We
also
haven't
for them
talked.
an opportunity to show us the low end and the high end,
I
for
like
them to
that.
get a sense of what can we, the high end was really.
Place in Burlingame.
Yeah, we were like, nope, can't do that. So, them testing the waters on what,
And they're the same
What's
way we
appropriate,
Your
exactly.
broker takes you and.
it was great.
This is like
But they've done some really good, I thought the mapping of staff was a really great exercise
did
to
a
know
zip
sort of
code.
where's that mid-
analysis, which I think you said the midpoint is in Menlo Park
ish.
ish. That's
This is,
it.
sorry, you guys, this is, like, the agenda.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so where is it?
Okay.
Well,
I don't know, Jen.
I do agree that, yeah, we just want to keep on the agenda item.
Right, well, the way I asked it was,
Sorry,
if you look at the full agenda, if you look at the full budget, part of the budget in there is office space.
That's
So I'm calling this under budget office space
Yeah.
line item. Kind of where we go in and how we do it with it from that standpoint.
and that
Like,
will
are
be
we-
reflected because we don't know, we might buy something. Who knows?
Yeah, we're also looking at buying.
Yeah, and that from a budget perspective, I would love, so I think we have a cash problem. We have too much. Right? And so I think it's something maybe in the future, sooner than later, with the executive committee, whatever, we start doing that balancing act, right?
Well,
So
maybe we should
what are the
just-
benefits of buying, and there's some intangible benefits of buying, actually. And then what are the, of leasing, and whatever, so but again, that's not agendized now.
Right, but that we could agendize.
Yes, we could,
To. talk about.
Right, just
And
saying.
And that would go to executive committee likely.
yeah,
And
Right.
what Jen, tell me if I'm saying too much, but what we are planning for executive committee in the next X months, 4, 6, something like that, is 3 options: status quo, stay where we are, move, lease, and I think it's lease 5 or lease 7, potentially, right? But right now we're looking at lease
Hopefully
5.
not 7.
And then the third option is buy something, buy a building. And what does that look like? It's a much more complicated
Yeah.
prospect, but those are some of the scenarios that we're working on right now to come back, and we'll start with executive committee. Executive committee would be asked to provide a recommendation, then to the full board. But this Samtrans opportunity is providing a little bit of, not a lot, but some urgency for us to know whether or not we want to move in that direction or not. So
You have plenty of time on that.
it's actually, it's fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
Compared to the rest of the morning, it was like, oh, good, let's go shop.
let's see, so any committee member reports?
I just have another report, just a question in my role as a council member. So the turnkey concierge, I don't know, the right way for like a Hillsborough family who wants to pay for the advice, that's fully up and running, so I can announce that.
Yes, it is, and I'll ping Raphael just so that he can send you more of the details. I think there's still some work to do on our webpage for that program.
I was exploring it last night and I was trying to kind of figure out
Yeah,
where someone who can definitely afford it.
where do they get their help?
On that page.
Exactly, yeah, and I can't answer that this very second, but I will plug you in right after this meeting. I know there's more to come on the website.
Donna, do you have anything?
No, I did include the new website link and all the data and dating to my colleagues. And they were excited and I'm gonna be out of town on Thursday. Desiree will be here getting trained, so I'm using this as an opportunity for her to get trained and then sit in on the meetings so people can meet her. And Marty will run the meeting.
Next Thursday,
Yeah,
This
the
is,
next-
this is the,
the
next
27th.
The
I was like, oh, there's the.
No,
No,
2 Thursdays.
The next meeting. So I'll see you guys all.
okay, I think is that, oh, right. Training, there's a training,
A new board member orientation
that's the
on the 27th
that's the 27th.
Yeah.
Yes.
Desiree.
at 5:30.
Right.
The board meeting is going to start a half an hour later at 7. We will get that information out to
And then
everybody.
the alternate. So- Pacific, it was very interesting, but it being.
Yeah, Nellie is the keeper of all of that.
So,
From a quorum
because he asked me about it,
from Pacifica.
yeah, from Pacific.
We're aware of that.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
I'm sorry that you have to go get back on your bike.
No, it's not.